Welcome back to Project Expedite Justice, Transitional Justice. We have Mutasim Ali. He joins us from Washington, from Arlington, and we're going to talk about what's happening in Sudan. And Sudan is really a very difficult and dangerous place right now.
Thank you, Jay. It's really great to be back. It's been quite some time. And sadly, now we're speaking during a really very difficult time for the people of Sudan who have struggled so much, for freedom and peace and justice, and only to face, now one of the humanitarian catastrophe and human tragedies in Sudan. And so I'm really glad to be on the show. Just also quickly to, note working for the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, not the Raoul Wallenberg Foundation. And just quickly, in terms of our work, we focus a lot on global human rights issues. We're covering a wide range of human rights issues in Latin America, in Europe, in Asia, in Africa. And my particular focus is on targeted human rights and anti-corruption sanctions against bad actors. And as you can tell, there are, many, many bad actors in the world today because of the rising global authoritarianism and the decline in global democracy. And therefore, our work is much more needed than ever before to speak for the victims and to say that all the crimes and the atrocities and the issues that they're going through, we're watching and we're doing something about it. We're not standing idly by. We do what in our capacity and beyond to speak for them and to represent their just issues.
Yeah, and you're from Sudan, so you must be emotionally invested in what's going on there in terms of, atrocities and war crimes that just keep on happening and going on and on. I was telling you before the show about this theory that I'm developing in my mind, and I like your thoughts on it. And, if you talk to somebody from Sudan, they'd be a nice person. You could sit, you could have a cup of tea with them. You'd enjoy their company. You'd enjoy knowing how they live and what they care about and so forth. But it's not those people that they are the victims. And there are millions of them. The ones who create the problem are these people with the guns, with the power. And I don't know what it is, but people with guns like to take power and vice versa. And so what you have is this rotating power struggle in Sudan. Every year or two, we get a new struggle, and new people come to power and engage in atrocities. It's really, it's so sad to see the ordinary folk, the ordinary citizens, the ordinary people on the street. They're victims, and it's just a handful of people who control the weapons who make life so hard for them. Tell me your thoughts about that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for highlighting that. And I think you eloquently elaborated on, what is happening in Sudan today. It is really not about the people of Sudan, right? Like the people of Sudan, just as you mentioned, are really decent and kind people. And to a certain extent, I feel like because of their kindness and generosity and, how welcoming the society is, I think the military and the bad actors are taking advantage of this, and unfortunately, I think the issues that the people of Sudan are facing are definitely multifaceted, right? There are some historical issues that are related to the identity problem, right? Different. We haven't been so successful in managing the diversity in the country. I think that was part of the problem, but it really does not justify what the people of Sudan are going through today. This is what is happening today across Sudan, right? It used to happen in certain regions such as Darfur, the two areas, South Kordofan, Blue Nile, and South Sudan now became an independent state. But because of the failure to treat issues in the in peripheries, now the problem sort of spilled over the entire country, and perhaps now there's like a fear of a spill over to the region, not just to Sudan but also to the neighboring countries. And I think really these are one of the major, the worst, crimes that one can ever think of, right? Like we're speaking of, war crimes, crimes against humanity, against innocent civilians, right? People had no role whatsoever in any that sort of political competition, and they just want to have a normal life, and yet you have military generals just because for greed for power, but also to consolidate their grips on power, and to protect themselves from future accountability, right, and to protect their wealth. They're willing to go as far as massacring innocent civilians just to remain in seats and protect their wealth. And it is really unfortunate, but there is much to it. And I think we cannot, give up on this. I think the world has much, and there are many tools that the international community, the humanity can do to stop atrocities like that of Sudan.
It's funny you should frame it that way because that was the headline of an article in the New York Times. We cannot give up on Sudan. And that raises the question of, gee, there are people around who would like to give up on Sudan. It's a failed state, it's a state of violence, but we can't give up on it. That's like giving up on humanity. We can't do that.
Absolutely. No, I think I think we do not have, as I used to say, we do not have the luxury to to stand idly by, right? To give up on protecting the people of Sudan, because what is happening in Sudan today can happen anywhere else, if we do not act to stop it. And I think we have really an obligation, right, to protect what is happening in Sudan, to protect what is happening in the people of Ukraine, for instance, to protect many other atrocities. During the 1940s, during the Holocaust, when the world gathered, in responding to the atrocities, right, and the Holocaust at the time, people, clearly stated that what happened in 1940s should never happen again, right? And I think that's really a strong commitment. But unfortunately, we continue to see that, happening time and again. It happened in Eastern Europe, and it happened in Rwanda. It happened in Darfur, Sudan. Now the second time it's happening. It happens in Myanmar. It happens in many other places. And I think it is just for us about to follow through. If we follow through, we will definitely prevent future atrocities from happening. And so it is on our shoulder to stand by the victims, and to stand by our words and follow through, not just empty promises. And I think victims want to hear this. I think victims are strong, and they're willing to thrive and survive these tragedies. Of course, I mean, they just need that little hope that they're not alone in this, and that the international community and humanity is with them.
It's the devil's brew when you give guns to people who shouldn't have them. It's the devil's brew when you give weapons of war to people who should not be should not be in charge, who cannot govern, who are not qualified at any level, either intellectually or emotionally, who are monsters. And if you give them guns, they will take power, and they will destroy your civil society. We see that, as you said, we see that over and over again in autocracies now in the world. And it strikes me this isn't without consequence in everywhere, and the same for Ukraine. It's not without external viral consequence. It sends a message to other autocrats, and it says to them, "You can get away with this. Just get the guns and have at it," and they do. So we can't allow Sudan to fail. We can't allow Ukraine to fail. We have to show the world, we have to show all the autocrats in the world they can't get away with this, which is, one of the reasons you look for accountability, right?
Absolutely. Remember, a few years ago when appeared on the show here and we spoke about this transitional justice in Sudan. At the time, things were a little more helpful when there was a transitional government. People were speaking of transitional justice mechanisms, accountability, compensation for victims, and institutional reforms to make sure that there will be no recurrence to the ongoing events. Unfortunately, that didn't work. And so, yeah, really one of the really most important things that you mentioned is that most of these generals who have the wealth and the weapons, right, to oppress people, right, they're not really they're incompetent to rule people, and in situations like in countries like Sudan, you really do not have to go to school even, right, to run the country. Now, it used to be the deputy sort of sovereign council, which is like the highest authority in the country, has never finished his school, and yet he is a deputy. We could say deputy president of the country, right? Like he's this number two person in the country. He did not finish his school, and so he really didn't have to go to school to in situation. It's unfortunate. This is the situation, but the really the major issue here is really the lack of accountability, right? These two generals in Sudan. One is the commander of the Sudan Armed Forces, and the other is the commander of the paramilitary, which was actually established by the Sudan Armed Forces, right? The commander of the paramilitary forces used to be once commander of Janjaweed, right? They committed atrocities in Darfur in the early 2000s, right? Over 300,000 people were killed. Over 2.5 million people were forced to leave their homes in Darfur. We're speaking of early 2000s, right? But none of these generals and their associates and their aides have been held to account for the crimes they committed, except for one person who surrendered to the International Criminal Court, and now he is in the custody of the International Criminal Court. That's the only person that has been held to account, right? But the remaining generals, none of them, and they actually, got more power, got more wealth. They're establishing more, regional and international connections, right? And so, it only sort of, what this message, what this send is that it's rewarding sometimes, right? To be an autocrat and to be an oppressor, to be a dictator is really rewarding because you can get a lot more money. You can, get more power, right? And this is not going to be, this doesn't happen a lot, right? Like because these generals have regional connections, right? Many countries, right? And so it's really unfortunate, but I think that's exactly the reason why what is happening in Sudan cannot be solved by Sudanese people alone, right? The international community needs to involve in this to help the people of Sudan in attaining freedom, peace, and justice.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that. I was disappointed what happened in Rwanda, where the United Nations left town. All the blue helmets went away somewhere, and there was nobody there to protect, the atrocities. And the United Nations really doesn't have a very good track record on going in with blue helmets and actually bringing peace and tranquility to a place that needs it. Likewise, the International Court of Criminal Justice, they really haven't done a good job, in my opinion, in dealing with atrocities and war criminals. And there's so many of them out there. So many people have been killed, and yet the number of prosecutions minimal, and the number of convictions and sentences minimal. So it's very troubling that there is no international organization. The other aspect of this is that for their own agendas and special interests, you have third party countries getting involved in power struggles like the repeated ones in Sudan. And my very limited reading on this suggests that when the rotating government was established in 2021, was a rotate from civilian to military and back to civilian. I think we talked about that. That that's an idea that is probably just not sustainable anywhere. But that's what was set up, and the United States of America was behind that. That they encouraged that. They wanted that to happen. Where was the State Department thinking? What were they thinking when they encouraged that? So it seems to me that when you have these other countries coming in and giving advice, the advice is cheap and the advice sometimes is completely wrong and doesn't work. And here we have the result. The Sudan is, it's governed by not civilian versus military, but by military versus military. What could be worse? And I'm saying, isn't there a kind of responsibility here for the countries, the state departments of various countries that were involved in having influence on Sudan when it was so tender, so fragile, so vulnerable, and now here we're paying the price. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. Just a couple of things. I agree with you 100% that the international community really failed the people of Sudan. In 2007, in the midst of atrocities in Darfur, the United Nations Security Council, together with the African Union, issued a resolution by which they sent, the United Nations African Mission in Darfur, sort of troops to observe, monitor human rights abuse, and also to a certain extent protect civilians from attacks by perpetrators, the Janjaweed, either or Sudanese Sudan Armed Forces at the time, but also to protect humanitarian missions that deliver aid. Right after the fall of Bashir in 2019, and upon the request of the rotating transitional government at the time, the United Nations Security Council withdrew the forces without putting forces in place to protect the civilians. This is just to demonstrate your point in terms of, in Rwanda, they sort of withdrew the blue helmets and they left the people, alone. So this is exactly what they have done in Darfur, and now the people of Darfur are paying the price. Just about a week ago, the United Nations, revealed that there were, a mass grave of 87 individuals in West Darfur state killed by the paramilitary forces, the rapid support forces. It used to be the Janjaweed militia, right? And this is really one of the reasons why I think, the international community failed the people of Darfur. Like, they already had military force in Darfur. And because of just 1 year into transition, they believed that things would change. And so they withdrew the forces and they left the people alone without really putting alternative as to how people would be protected in case of attacks. Now, in terms of the ICC, Will, again, also is part of the international community. That really didn't do a lot. I mean, there's much expected from the ICC, right? But also the ICC is really limited in terms of resources, and it really relies heavily on the cooperation of the member states to extradite perpetrators, right? The ICC does not have military or police force to help arrest and extradite perpetrators, and it really relies only on member states to collaborate with the ICC, and this has not been has not gone so well, especially in the case of Sudan. Bashir was one of the suspects, and he used to travel even to the ICC member states, and including South Africa and Jordan, and they've never wanted to extradite him. And Bashir is now in Sudan, but his whereabouts exactly in Sudan is unknown, and in addition to a few others. In terms of the US and other countries, definitely I think the U.S. The State Department and the U.S. government's assessment to political dynamics in Sudan are not, they're mistaken in their assessment. Let me put it that way, because they placed, a lot of faith in the military generals as partners to, quote unquote, partners to democratic transition in Sudan, and this is something that many advocates for freedom and justice in Sudan, many victims have advocated that the international community in the United States should not place faith in generals who committed atrocities in Darfur, committed atrocities in the Blue Nile and South Kordofan, committed atrocities in South Sudan. They've never been held to account, right? And instead, the United States should collaborate with other countries to hold them to account. And that's exactly really one of the reasons why, perpetrators fear no justice, at least in the context of Sudan, because they will never be held to account, right? And instead, they're being considered to democratic transition in Sudan, and that's really one of the failures. And I think the United States I hope that the U.S. government is getting it by imposing targeted sanctions on these perpetrators and exerting tremendous pressure for them to stop war. But also, it's not enough to put pressure on the war importers in Sudan, rather support the Sudanese people who, courageously, are fighting against these generals, and they're fighting for freedom and justice, not only for the people of Sudan.
Are they fighting? Do they have a military organization?
What I mean, I think the people. I mean, definitely there are military groups that they're fighting against the Sudan armed forces, against the autocrats, not only the Sudan armed forces but also the paramilitary, which used to be the right hand of the Sudanese armed forces, right? But the most powerful tool for the Sudanese people, which help them oust one of the Africa's longest dictators, Omar Bashir, was the non-resistance movement and non-violent movement, and I think that's really sort of it proved its effectiveness in bringing all people together, and by picking up arms. I don't think the people of Sudan will be able to defeat the generals, because they've got much more power, and they're even willing to just massacre everybody just for the sake of.
Why do they kill, by the way, in the minds of those generals or the troops that work for them? Why are they killing 300,000 people? Are they seeking a result of some kind?
Well, I mean, I think there, at least in the context of Darfur, most of the killings in the region, were done by militias, and as well as the Sudan armed forces. Right, the Sudan armed forces used to bombard villages of African indigenous people, right, and as many people documented, the ultimate goal at the time was to change the racial identity of the region Darfur from basically by erasing removing and displacing the original people of the land and replacing them by non-African tribes, Arabs from Darfur, also neighboring countries. So basically, it was really ethnic aspect of it.
That's genocide.
It is absolutely genocide, and that's exactly the reason why the International Criminal Court indicted the Sudan's former president Omar Bashir for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide in 2010. And so it is really a genocide, and unfortunately, that's same intent to commit genocide. Well, actually, let me just say, instead of genocide, intent to massacre non-African and non-Arabs in Darfur is still happening at the moment, right? It is the reason why more than 3,000 people were killed in West Darfur only from April 25 to now, right? 3,000 people were killed in only one state in Darfur, and this is just between April 25 and July until today, right? This is a huge. And actually this is really underestimated numbers, because the free press has no access to the state at the moment. People cannot really report or document the atrocities that are committed against the people in West Darfur.
Can you go back there, Mutasim?
At the moment, unfortunately, I cannot. Even those who are in the country are striving to leave the country. They're looking for ways to leave the country because it is unbearable to remain there. There's a total collapse of the state, right? There's no government, right? You have militias, you have Sudan Armed Forces, both they are fighting, and there's like really a power vacuum, and this really it only raises a major question that given this sort of the power vacuum and the civilians being target of the warring parties. What should the international community do? Perhaps sending, peacekeeping or protection missions.
International community, but it's sort of like the EU. Everybody has their own agenda, and if you tell them they should all get behind Ukraine, well, everybody has their own agenda, and it doesn't work as well as you'd like. So I hate to use the word colonialism because I think Africa has been, damaged by colonialism profoundly over the last couple hundred years and more. But I wonder if there were a strong United Nations, or if the United States would be faithful to its moral principles, its democratic principles, and it would say, look, we have a big military here, and we're telling you guys that you can't shoot your citizens, your fellow citizens. Can't do it. We're not going to let you do that. And we're going to come into your city, your town, your region, Darfur, or any other city in Khartoum, for example, and we are going to make for peace. Nobody shoots nobody. And if you are going to shoot somebody, we are going to get you right now, and it won't be pretty for you. And we're going to keep on doing that until everything settles down, and then we're going to see if we can have an election and have democratic government. And we're not talking about junta; we're talking about civilian government, and we're going to be there. It's almost like what you do in a country where you have colonial power. I wouldn't use that term, but colonial power in a country where you have been at war and now you have the power and you have the moral suasion to actually make a new society. Isn't that what we need to do here and elsewhere?
Unfortunately, I think the unilateral interventions, have proven ineffectiveness, and also really resulted in very not necessarily resolving the issues that we're hoping to see resolved. And we can take examples of a bunch of countries, including Iraq, Afghanistan, and all of that. And so, really, the examples that we draw are not very good ones. And it is for that reason, I think, it is really important for the multilateral bodies such as the United Nations, right? That everybody is in there. People should have shared values in protecting humanity, right? In having protecting the dignity of a person. this is supposed to be a shared value of everybody, and I think that's what is really needed, and that's exactly the reason why they established that sort of institution of the United Nations.
That was a long time ago.
That was
You'll have to agree with me. It hasn't been successful in recent years, and partly it is the Security Council and the veto and Russia and China and all that.
right.
So the question is, how can you get where you need to go in Sudan and other countries in Africa and elsewhere? I mean, there are failed states in the Middle East for sure, and Russia has been party to that, and Prigozhin, the mercenaries, they've been party to that in many places, and just for their own agendas to ingratiate themselves to, to make money. So my question is, how can we do that? Because right now, when you have all this killing going on in Sudan, and you talk about, we have to bring accountability. Accountability comes after peace, doesn't it? First, we have to have peace and human rights. Then we can deal with accountability. Am I right?
Yeah, you're right, and I think, I agree with you that willing to have accountability and to satisfy victims, there need to be a peaceful environment where people can see the justice process, not just people being held to account, but even the process leading to that justice. But I also think that in situations like Sudan, I think part of accountability is by imposing targeted sanctions on the perpetrators, cutting them off from the financial flow that fuels the war, right?
And how about weapons?
And weapons, right? And arm embargoes, things like that, making them international pariahs, right? These are kind of things that I think it's a form of accountability. And I think to a certain extent, I feel like it could be even more effective than the intervention even by the United Nations, as you mentioned, has not really been very successful, and it's not been true to its mission. So I think the really one of the things that the international community states, like the United States, like the UK and the EU, and a bunch of other states, they need to multilaterally impose targeted sanctions. Right, we speak of targeted sanctions to make sure that we are targeting the perpetrators, and so sanctions would not have an unintended consequences to civilians and humanitarian aid, delivery of humanitarian aid, and so that's number one. But also, I think it is really important to target, third parties, states that support the warring parties, and so basically, by doing so, I think we'll cut them off from the resources that will allow them to continue war and allow them to fight, and making sure that war is costly, it's not rewarding. As at the moment, war for them is really rewarding because you can get a lot more money, you can get a lot more influence, and I think we need to make that war is not rewarding, rather costly for them. And I think this is really what the international community needs to do. And I think in the US, the United States has, a bunch of tools in this regard to promote accountability. The United Kingdom as well, the Canada, the EU and other countries have mechanisms for targeted sanctions against these perpetrators. I think this is only one tool to hold these individuals and perpetrators to account. In addition, of course, to effective diplomacy, by helping the civilians, the people's representatives, and people who fight day and night peacefully to respond to the authoritarianism in Sudan and places like Sudan.
Well, at least in substantial part, that's what you're doing. So,
exactly.
So let me ask you. I mean, if you had the ear of Tony Blinken, they said, look, this is a moral obligation of the United States. I don't think the Republicans would necessarily agree with that, but let's assume that we have agreement about that in Congress and in the government and with the president. Now, you were going to give them advice on how the United States could apply sanctions, how it could take the steps necessary to make peace, to make quality of life again in Sudan, what would you tell them to do? Let's say they're ready for your advice.
Yes, definitely. So a couple of things. First and foremost, for the policymakers in the U.S. to particularly target the warring parties, all the generals, right, involved in war and committing atrocities against the Sudanese people. They also should target companies that fuel and their associates, all their networks, right? This is the second thing. The third is to target countries that are aiding them, right? There are a bunch of other countries that facilitate aid and support to the warring parties, and I think by doing so, this is a huge step. Then the United States as well can and should help the civil society groups that are well organized, and that we're not just saying stopping war, but we have actually plans that how things should be after stopping war, right? Like the restoration of democratic transition, having a comprehensive process where everybody feels part of the process. And I think the final thought I have in this regard is, in terms of international justice and and bringing these perpetrators before trials, either national or international jurisdictions, such as the ICC, for instance. And I think in the U.S. the U.S. has the reward program, which they can actually list perpetrators of war crimes and crimes against humanity and genocide on the program, and suggesting that everybody, whoever knows the location and whereabouts of these individuals, will get this X amount of money. So basically, it's really a reward program to determine whereabouts of the suspects. And I think this is really one of the good examples that how the U.S. can effectively engage in promoting accountability, and should collaborate with the ICC and other accountability institutions in holding the perpetrators to account.
The U.S. can and should be a leader in this. Right now, the U.S. is a little bit fragmented, in a state of divisiveness, but hopefully we can find our key, can find our moral center, and we can do this. We still have a greater chance of being a world leader than any other country. Am I right?
You're totally right, and I think I'm not giving up on the U.S. And I think as of recent, there have been quite refreshing statements from the State Department in terms of naming and shaming the perpetrators. I think this is a really good one, as well as the statement before the United Nations Security Council in terms of helping and being willing to provide any assistance necessary to the International Criminal Court to hold perpetrators to account. And I think these are really refreshing statements and positions by the U.S., and I hope they follow through and they remain consistent to these statements, and placing faith on the civilians, not the military generals, in promoting democratic transition in Sudan. These are not partners to peace and democracy. These are warmongers, and I think we should isolate them and making them international pariahs.
Amen. Amen to all of that. Thank you so much, for your service to not only Sudan, not only the Wallenberg organization, but to humanity. And I hope that everything you want will come true. And I would like to revisit with you in the next weeks and months. And I have more questions, actually, Mutasim. And I would like to ask you about that. I'd like to follow on what is going on in the world. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Ed, and I will appreciate the opportunity. I look forward to having a further discussion with you on all the issues that you have in mind.
Aloha.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please click the like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Check out our website, thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.